Okay, good. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Sharon Davis. I am an assistant professor of reading education at Florida A&M University. The illustrious FAMU strike.
Yes. No,
The FAMUans in the house.
Yes.
And so as I was sitting here thinking, number one, kudos to all of you for the work that you're doing. And I just wanted to say that I really think that reading is a science. It is indeed a science, and I'd like to argue that it is, even with all the talk we hear of STEM and the money that goes to STEM because it's the buzzword now. Reading truly is a science because you can't teach yourself to read. And so I go ahead and apply for all the STEM grants too, just because, hey, I just want to argue with them. But I do want to ask one of you, anyone that wants to jump in on it, how do we leverage, and so the students now have this, there's some people that are very well read, and they're still ignorant. We've talked a lot about how literacy makes us free, and there's some free people who are very literate, and yet they're very ignorant. So how do we leverage, and speaking about that part of the population, how do we leverage their cultures, their biases, their inherent fears of the loss of control with literacy today?
So one or two of you wants to tackle that? Thank you for asking a question. I forgot to mention that when I moderate, I actually will make you ask a question or I'll cut you off. So good job asking a question. Go ahead.
Part of that is we gotta create a culture where we are encouraged to read outside of our comfort zones, that we read things that make us uncomfortable, right? As a computer guy, you know, as somebody who taught computer science for 17 years, I really worry that technology is, I'm gonna sound so old now, but I worry that technology is making it difficult to get out of our comfort zones. You know, you get online and the algorithms attack you. They figure out who you are, they fit you in boxes, and then they serve things up to you in these nice, tidy bows, and that's not always helpful. You know, I can only say in the microcosm of the high school where I used to teach, the strongest force against that, against the tendency to apply algorithms to human beings, were the human librarians. They were the ones that broke us out of our comfort zones, you know, that let us. Librarians deserve all the applause they can get, but they were the ones that took us out of our Netflix recommendations and our Amazon recommendations. The librarian recommendations are worth way more than whatever an algorithm can serve up.
I was going to say, I'm a real firm believer that what we offer to our kids tells them what it is that we value. Mm-hmm. So when you have conversations in which there isn't a right answer or a bubble on a test to fill in, you tell kids that there is nebulousness, I don't even know if that's a word, there's nebulous things in life, but you also tell them that you value their opinion when you engage that discourse. But we have got to get people who understand how to do that in a classroom. And with our fixation on assessments now, it's like, well, how do I grade that? What score? Like, who cares how you grade it? It's going to be graded by people's response to it. So, you know, you go into a classroom and you watch teacher to student, and it's very few opportunities for kid to kid to kid to kid to argue where I could say, no, I don't think that way as you, right? So we have got to support that as many ways as possible and teach people how to do it in a very thoughtful kind of way. And also be aware of what's, you know, I used to always say this about the Common Core. Common Core is fine, but unless you know what to do with higher standards and support kids in acquiring higher standards. There's a large southern state who 4 or 5 years ago put in their legislation that teachers could not teach higher level thinking skills. What's up with that, right? And so, and one of the reasons was a state legislator stood up and said, well, these kids may come home and disagree with their parents. Like, what do we do about that? Like, political action, right?
Other questions? There's one in the front.
Good afternoon. My name is Keisha Lee. I live in the most literate city in America, which is Washington, D.C. I also live in Southeast D.C., Ward 8, the most under-resourced area of D.C. I want to hang out on literacy equals liberation. I'm really curious to anyone on the panel, your perspective, your advice, your ideas, your thoughts. Beyond the classroom, how do we engage, advocate for literacy, the range of how you might define it, in communities like Ward 8, DC, like Detroit, where practically we are failing entire generations of kids and families? And I'm not an educator traditionally. I used to teach in DC. I agree with you. The entire system has to be dismantled, and I can't operate within it. So now I'm operating outside of it as an advocate. And the idea is then how do I take the advocacy for Ward 8 Reads and really, really stretch it and push it so that people get angry. None of the kids in DC and Ward 8 are reading on grade level. It's 3, 3, and 9% from high school down. That's atrocious.
Yes.
And I'll answer this question as Cornelius Minor, a 2000 graduate of the Florida A&M University. I'm in a lot of places, and my job is to go to a place and engage teachers in doing the work of literacy, whatever that means in that particular locale. I just left Schenectady, New York, which is a very, very urban town in the state of New York that is not New York City. So when you're not New York City and you're in New York State, you get very little attention. But this little town, the librarian there is this one amazing lady, and we've been really grappling with, like the same thing where we've got these pockets of widespread illiteracy in this literacy-rich state. So what are we doing? And so we've been really questioning, like, how can we bring literacy to communities? What are all the different ways? And these aren't new questions. These are questions that people have been asking for a while. And so we polled the students, and we discovered this spring that most of the students hang out at the pool and the basketball court over the summer. And so we took books to basketball. And so we're on all the basketball courts with books, and we're talking to the guys that hang out on the courts about the books and how they borrow and how they share and how they talk. And then we're letting those books kind of take a life of their own as they leave that basketball court and go back to communities. And so we're beginning to track that and ask some questions about that. But really, I think two things: listening to kids. I think we very rarely ever do that. So when kids aren't reading, they know why. Mm-hmm. And so listening to kids and then honoring what they say.
I think it's also, those are wonderful, my fellow Rattler.
Well, damn.
Right.
So a lot of y'all
we're
in
in
here.
Florida, we're allowed. Just really quickly, I wanted to say that I think it's just really crucial that we challenge this notion of U.S. individualism, because one of the things that we haven't said that needs to be said before the panel ends is that in all of these pockets of despair, there is hope. I came out of Detroit. I have colleagues that came out of West Virginia and Camden. My best girlfriend came out of South Central LA during the crack era. So clearly, something somewhere worked. We're not exceptions. There are people who work within oppressive systems to bring light and justice. And we always say, we can't scale these practices up. People look at the teachers who trained me. I had algebra in 7th grade, Christopher Holstein. I must give him a shout out. He's been at Bates Academy teaching for 35 years. What is Chris Holstein doing in Detroit to get algebra to 7th graders that we could scale up and do across the nation? Again, it's a matter of political will. Do we have the will to do that? Because the challenge is, if you have more Ebony Elizabeth Thomases and other, who are able to get out of Detroit, Camden, West Virginia, the Bronx, et cetera, then yes, we will be in the applicant pool for jobs along with middle class and upper middle class white children. We have to decide. We are at the cusp of some great decisions as a nation. We know what to do. We know how to educate urban children. We know how to educate children from non-dominant backgrounds. I'm not a unicorn. I exist. So do thousands and millions of others like me. We need the political will to put not only just money, it's not just money, it's about will. What kind of nation will we be in the 21st century? We get to decide. We don't have much longer to do so.
I am Michelle Parker Rock, and people ask me where I'm from, and my answer always is, I'm from the Bronx, New York. I don't live there anymore, but that's where I'm from. I was very fortunate growing up. I'm just going to make a little prelude to my question. Having experienced in the 50s a very multicultural experience in a Bronx neighborhood, which now, of course, is completely different from, and I actually felt that, I always thought that I was a minority in my neighborhood because it was so multicultural, that it was, everybody was a minority, there was no majority. Okay, so my question is political. We've been dancing around it, but I'm tired of dancing around it. We actually may get what we're wishing for. This, we can't fix it, so it has to be completely demolished. There are people, the powers that be, are actually working on that right now, but not for the good purposes that we are discussing here and that we're hoping for. We probably have the largest battle right now in education. The Department of Education nationally is non-existent. It's irrelevant to us. It's not there to support us anymore. We are facing a voucher system that is going to do exactly what it set out to do by design, and thank you so much for pointing that out, because I believe that this is all by design. I stand here because I understand a life of poverty. I grew up poor. I also have empathy because I have a history as a white person. We all have a heritage that we come from, and many of us have come from suffering and hard times, even though we're white, and we can empathize with what's happening now. So we're looking at possible privatization of school across our nation now. And we know who's going to be the hardest hit with that. We can outline it now. So I'm going to throw that out as a kind of a non-question, but I'd love to really hear your views on where we are now. We're headed there now. What do we do? Can we head it off at the pass? Do we wait until there's total disaster? So you hear my Bronx accent right there.
If I could,
Thank you.
Did y'all cut my mic off? Y'all cut my mic off. That's okay, I'm loud. The key to your question is not thinking that this is something that is happening because of this administration. Because as we know, the privatization movement is coming from the left and the right. Charter schools, you look at the expansion of charter schools, which are putting public funding into private schools. This is coming from the left, and it is the left that also opened the door for what we are now seeing. So I think what my work is trying to do is to recenter education as a common good, as a public good, where we have come, the left and the right, to think of it as a consumer and an individual good. That the system should be about what I can get for my child, and the system should cater to my child, and I should be able to shop for things for my child. So I think we need to push back against this narrative that Trump somehow has fundamentally changed education landscape. I think he is certainly opened up for expansion. But you didn't see people complaining about the Obama administration expanding funding for charter schools, but not for integration of traditional public schools. So I think we need to be realistic about that, and look very deeply into what liberals have also embraced in terms of the marketization of what should be a common good.
Yeah, I would say amen, and I could say that having been in the Obama administration. One of the things there's always this argument for is with one particular secretary is how could you be against vouchers but just be open to charters without any accountability or what understanding or saying it's so sort of this blanket approval of all charters are great when we know they're not great, right? So to me, it's all about political action. I was reading this, I don't know who wrote it, perhaps you know, it was within the last 2 days, there was this question mark about, there was an editorial or a blog written that was called, instead of asking what's wrong with Trump, why don't we start asking what's wrong with ourselves?
Us, yes.
And it gave me a lot of pause to just think of like, what am I doing every day to change the world in which that I want to leave for the next generation? And what do we do? Because I think you mentioned earlier, like we know what to do. It's do we have the heart and the willingness to do it?
Absolutely.
And I was really, I was in Chicago, right, it was the day of the inauguration or the next day when all the marches were occurring across the country, and I joined the march in Chicago, and I thought, wow, if we stand this up for social justice, going back to sort of the 60s, can you imagine how different our country will be, and maybe we put a stake in the ground. It's scary to me, and I'm thinking much more around this question about what's wrong with us at this moment in time? And do we just sit back and say, okay, wait to the midterms, wait to the next election, wait for somebody else to come up out of the darkness with a red cape superhero? That's just not coming right now. So we have to collectively take charge and stop with. We don't need one more blue ribbon or task force to figure out what ought to happen.
Do we have time for one more question? Oh, no more questions? Oh.
Facebook feed? Yeah, we have a question that came in from one of our live viewers on the Facebook feed that we wanted to ask. They asked, how do white teachers gain the trust of young black children who see white adults on TV abusing and killing teens like them?
Wow. Wow.
Who wants to take that one?
Cornelius?
No one.
The
Okay.
answer is, I feel like, and I'm a huge believer, again, that there is no one way, there are many ways, and so to look for a prescriptive answer in a package is a bit problematic, but it always goes back to time. I love how we keep coming back to this idea, as fractured as it may be, a United States of America. And that if I want to earn the trust of a potential partner, if I want to earn the trust of a neighbor, I invest time. There's no program I can buy, there is no consultant that I can pay, but I can invest time.
I keep thinking about, one of our challenges is that we have a fantasy about what the United States is. Many of us, not just white people, some people of color, people who come here for more opportunities. We have the fantasy of what the United States of America is versus the reality of it. And I'm thinking if we can all invest more in the reality of what these United States truly are, then we can begin to heal and repair the nation so that we can truly become, and that work of repair begins in the classroom. I mean, I'm more cynical than I was 10 years ago when I began doing research on classrooms, but I'm still very optimistic and hopeful. I do believe that we can come to the end of white supremacy. I believe we can.
So you are optimistic.
Yeah.
So I do feel very optimistic.
Yeah,
Okay.
I also think too, like actually in the classroom, I keep coming back to this idea of humanity and just, if you're gonna be in a situation where you're trying to gain the trust of students and have them be real with you, then I think you have to be real with them. Like you can't sugarcoat what they're seeing and what they're experiencing. You have to acknowledge that and let them express it and let them talk about it. We at Teaching Tolerance have been hearing so many stories since before the election and definitely since the election of just ugliness in these, using Trump as a taunt. We're gonna build a wall, you're not gonna be here much longer because you're about to go across the wall. Like all that kind of stuff. And if teachers are sitting in front of these students and not acknowledging what they're experiencing, then they're not gonna trust you. So I definitely think it's a matter of hearing them and letting them hear you too, because I don't think you need to sit up there like you have answers necessarily or have all the answers. I see definitely a need for more vulnerable spaces and just being honest with each other before you can move to any point beyond that.
It's how do you engage in critical conversations, right? Adult to adult in a school. And I go back to it's, when kids leave classrooms, I've always thought this, they don't remember if you had them memorize the states and the capitals or the algebraic expression. They remember how you interacted with them, if you believed in them. That's what they remember, and that's what they'll come back to time and time again. So it's how do we give a blessing, if you will, to tell folks in schools to care and act upon their caring and have other people learn how to act upon their caring and just be open without the answers.
And also address the kids who are doing those taunts, right? It's not just about the victims, but those kids and that sort of trickling down where that's coming from. And there's been a lot of studies on this, particularly since the election, but the presentation of facts does not often change someone's mind. So what can you really do? Human interaction has an impact, but I really think it goes back to children's literature. There's been so many studies about how it influences empathy, but as someone in the audience said when they were asking that question, there's plenty of smart people who are deeply racist, and I certainly know a lot of well-read people who are not the nicest or kindest, and And it goes back to what they're reading and the perspective that is depicted in what they're reading.
Okay, I think that's it. Okay, thank you all. Have a sit now.